Hey everyone, and welcome back for another deep dive with us.
Always a pleasure.
So, today we're going to rewind the clock a bit.
Ooh, time travel. I love it.
Well, sort of. We're going back to the 1980s.
The 80s. Big hair, neon colors, leg warmers, the whole shebang.
Got it. We've got a treasure trove of Thanksgiving commercials, promos, and TV segments, all from that era.
Wow, talk about a time capsule. I bet there's some serious nostalgia in there.
Oh, absolutely. But, it's not just about the cheesy jingles and shoulder pads. This is a chance to see how the world has changed, or maybe hasn't, in the last few decades.
That's what's so fascinating about these glimpses into the past, right? They're like these little windows into our culture and values, what we were into back then, what grabbed our attention.
So we're not just going for a nostalgia trip. We're actually trying to understand ourselves better through the lens of the 80s. I'm in.
Exactly. And one of the first things that jumps out when you look at these commercials is the technology. I mean, we're talking Atari.
Okay, I can already see some younger listeners out there going, Atari, what's that?
Right. But back then, that was the cutting edge. I mean, there's this ad for Atari boasting about its joystick and keyboard capabilities for advanced computer games, like Flight Simulator 2.
Flight Simulator 2. Wow, now we have VR headsets and incredibly realistic graphics.
It really puts things into perspective, doesn't it? The pace of technological change is mind-blowing. Imagine trying to explain a smartphone to someone in 1985. They'd think it was magic.
No kidding. You know what else is interesting?
What's that?
It makes you think about how those simpler systems back then fostered a different kind of engagement.
Oh, yeah, totally. Like, think back to those pixelated graphics. You had to use your imagination to fill in the gaps.
Exactly. It was almost a more active and immersive experience in a way.
I see what you mean. And speaking of immersion, these commercials weren't just about the tech. The sheer volume of sales and promotions crammed into the Thanksgiving season is pretty remarkable.
Oh, yeah. It's like a battle royale between Kmart, Sears, JCPenney, all vying for shoppers. Doorbuster deals starting at crazy early hours on Black Friday.
I remember those days. The stores would be packed.
Yeah, you might find this hard to believe, but online shopping wasn't really a thing back then. It was peak in-person shopping frenzy. A completely different beast than today's digital shopping carts and one-click orders.
You have to wonder, has our consumerism actually increased or has it just shifted platforms? I mean, are Black Friday and Cyber Monday just the digital descendants of those chaotic department store sales? The desire for a deal, the thrill of the hunt, it seems to be a constant across generations.
Absolutely. And speaking of generations, we can't forget the marketing blitz aimed right at the kids. I mean, toys, galore, Cabbage Patch Kids, Kenner starting lineup figures, Lego.
Oh man, I can practically hear the collective groans of parents everywhere as their kids begged for the latest must-have toy. But mom, everyone at school has one.
Right. But here's the thing. Compare those marketing techniques to today's world, where kids are bombarded with ads everywhere, social media, mobile games, YouTube.
It's constant. It really makes you think about the evolving nature of advertising and its impact on young minds, especially today.
It's true, the sheer volume of exposure is vastly different. I mean, back then it was Saturday morning cartoons and maybe a toy catalog. Now, it's everywhere.
It's almost like there's a kind of innocence lost, a simpler time when the excitement for a new toy wasn't fueled by algorithms or online influencers.
Yeah, that's a really good point. But you're right, it's important to remember that every generation faces its own unique challenges navigating a world saturated with advertising and consumerism.
Exactly. It's not about romanticizing the past, but more about understanding how those influences shape us all.
Totally. Now, shifting gears a bit, let's talk about the entertainment that was being advertised back then.
Right.
There's a whole smorgasbord of classic shows and movies. Bugs Bunny's Thanksgiving Diet, A Charlie Brown Thanksgiving, The Cosby Show, even the Care Bears movie. It's like a snapshot of the 80s pop culture scene.
And it highlights a time when network television was king. I mean, families would gather around the TV for these shared experiences.
Which is so different from today, right? Now it's all about streaming services and personalized content.
It really is a different world. I wonder how someone growing up today, used to on-demand everything, would react to the concept of waiting a whole week for a new episode of their favorite show.
Right. It's funny to think about. Maybe they'd find it refreshing, a break from the constant stream of content. Or maybe they'd be totally bewildered.
Who knows? But it speaks to a different pace of life, a different relationship with anticipation and delayed gratification.
You're right about that. Well, I think that's a good point to pause for a moment. We've talked about technology, advertising, and entertainment so far, and it's already clear that the 1980s were a different world in many ways.
For sure.
But even with all those differences, I have a feeling we'll find some surprising connections to the world you live in today as we keep going.
Absolutely. I think as we dig deeper into these commercials, we'll see how certain themes, anxieties, and aspirations, they kind of transcend time and technology. It's fascinating, really.
Totally.
One thing that strikes me as we go through these commercials,
What's that?
it's how much they emphasize family and togetherness.
Oh, yeah, for sure. All those heartwarming scenes of families gathered around the Thanksgiving table, sharing a meal, enjoying each other's company.
Exactly. And it makes you wonder, right? The 80s are often associated with individualism and materialism, but these commercials kind of paint a different picture. They highlight the importance of community and shared experiences.
I see what you mean. It's like maybe that longing for connection is even stronger in today's world, where social media and digital devices can sometimes make you feel isolated even though you're constantly connected.
It's a good point. Maybe these glimpses of families laughing and sharing stories around a table, maybe they tap into something deeper, a human need that goes beyond time and technology.
Could be. It's definitely something to think about.
And it's not just about those idealized family gatherings.
What else?
These commercials, they also reveal a lot about the gender roles and expectations of the time.
Oh, absolutely. All those scenes of moms in the kitchen whipping up elaborate meals while dads are relaxing in the living room or watching football. It's a little hard to watch now, to be
I
honest.
know, right? Especially knowing how much those roles have evolved, thankfully. But it is a reminder that progress isn't always a straight line.
That's for sure.
It also makes you think, how did those portrayals influence young minds back then? Did those images reinforce certain stereotypes about who does what in a family? And how do those messages compare to the ones kids are getting today?
Wow, those are some big questions. Really important ones, too, especially for anyone listening who's growing up in a world where those gender roles are constantly being redefined and challenged.
It's your generation that's pushing those boundaries, shaping a more inclusive future.
Exactly. Speaking of shaping the future, there's another theme that pops up a lot in these commercials. The emphasis on education and achievement.
Yeah.
All those ads for educational toys and computer programs.
Oh, I remember those.
This toy will make your child a genius.
Right. It's interesting because it reflects that optimism of the 80s, a time when economic prosperity seemed attainable through hard work and education.
And how different is that from today, when the path to success can feel a lot less clear-cut?
Yeah. With a rapidly changing job market and all the uncertainties of the future, it makes you wonder what kind of messages we should be sending young people today. Are we giving them the skills and resilience they need to thrive in a world that's in constant flux?
It's a big question and a vital one. But it's also an exciting time. Your generation is growing up with a level of technological fluency and global awareness that we could only dream of back then.
And it's that very fluency that will shape the solutions to these complex challenges we're facing.
Exactly. But while we're looking back at these glimpses into the past, I think it's important to acknowledge that not everything has aged well.
Oh yeah, some of the humor and cultural references just don't land the same way they did back then. Some of it's even a little cringy, honestly.
For sure. And I think that's important to remember. Even something as seemingly harmless as a commercial can reflect broader societal biases and prejudices, and those things don't just disappear overnight.
Absolutely. It's about learning from the past, right? Both the triumphs and the missteps to create a better, more inclusive future.
Well said. And speaking of learning from the past, let's circle back to something we touched on earlier. The sheer volume of stuff being advertised. It's a constant barrage of products.
It really is. And they all promise to make your life better, happier, more fulfilling.
It makes you think, doesn't it?
Yeah.
How do you navigate all of that? How do you know what's really valuable and what's just hype?
That's the million-dollar question. It's definitely a skill, learning to be a critical consumer, questioning the messages you're bombarded with every day, prioritizing experiences over material possessions, all that good stuff.
All important skills in today's world, that's for sure. But, there's one thing that seems to have stayed remarkably consistent through the years.
What's that?
The power of food.
Ah, yes. Food. Those commercials were overflowing with classic brands. Pillsbury Crescent rolls, Butterball turkeys, McDonald's, even cream of wheat.
Food has this amazing ability to evoke nostalgia and comfort, like a sensory time machine.
It's true. Think about those smells and tastes that instantly transport you back to your grandma's kitchen or a special family gathering.
It's powerful stuff, and it makes you wonder, what will be the nostalgic food brands for your generation? What smells and tastes will bring back those warm, fuzzy feelings 20 or 30 years from now?
I love that. Like, will avocado toast be the new Pillsbury crescent rolls?
Maybe, but it just goes to show you how food, beyond just its nutritional value, it plays a huge role in shaping our cultural identity and personal memories. It's something that connects us across generations, even as our tastes and culinary trends evolve.
Okay, before we wrap up this segment, I'd love to hear your thoughts on something we've been circling around this whole time. This tension between embracing technological advancement
Yeah.
and longing for simpler times.
It's a fascinating paradox, isn't it? On one hand, we're drawn to the shiny new gadgets, the speed and efficiency of the digital world. But then there's this part of us that craves something more grounded, more authentic, more connected to the real world.
It's like we're caught between two worlds, trying to find that balance between progress and preservation.
And that tension, it's something that resonates across generations. It's not unique to the 80s or even to today. It's a fundamental human dilemma.
So how do we navigate that tension? How do we embrace the benefits of technology without losing sight of what really matters?
Ugh, that is the question of the century, isn't it? And one that we'll continue grappling with as technology keeps evolving at this incredible pace. But maybe, just maybe, by looking back at how previous generations tackled these challenges, we can learn a thing or two, find some wisdom to help us move forward.
It's a good reminder that even though the world is changing so rapidly, there are certain human needs and desires that stay the same. And maybe by understanding those constants, we can bridge the gap between generations and create a future that's both innovative and humane. You know, as we wrap up our deep dive into these 1980s Thanksgiving commercials, I keep thinking about that tension we talked about.
Which one?
That push and pull between embracing new technology and longing for simpler times.
Oh, yeah, totally. It's something we still feel today, don't you think?
Yeah.
I mean, we're bombarded with new gadgets and information all the time. It can be overwhelming. But then
Yeah.
there's this part of us that wants to slow down and simplify.
Right. It's like we're trying to find that sweet spot between progress and nostalgia.
And it's fascinating to see how those themes played out in these old commercials. You had all the excitement around home computers and video games.
But also that emphasis on family tradition. Those heartwarming moments that never seem to go out of style.
And maybe that's the biggest takeaway here. Amidst all the changes and advancements, some things just stay constant.
Like what?
The need for connection, the importance of community, the comfort of tradition. These are things that resonate with people across generations. They're the threads that connect us to the past and the future.
It's a good point. I mean, the world is constantly evolving, but it's reassuring to know that some things never really change.
Absolutely. And recognizing those shared human experiences can be really grounding, especially when it feels like everything is moving so fast.
It's like finding a common language that cuts through all the noise.
Exactly. And I think that's a valuable insight for anyone, no matter their age. It's easy to get caught up in the moment and lose sight of the bigger picture.
So as we finish up our trip back to the 80s, what's the one thing you hope our listeners take away from this?
That's a good question. I'd say this. In a world that's obsessed with the latest and greatest, don't forget to appreciate the simple things, the things that have brought people joy for generations.
Like what?
Spending time with loved ones, sharing a meal, telling stories, putting down the devices and connecting with each other in a real way. Those are the things that truly matter.
That's a beautiful thought. And it's amazing how these old commercials can spark such meaningful reflections.
It just goes to show you, sometimes the best wisdom comes from looking back.
Well said.
Yep.
Well, folks, that wraps up our deep dive into the 1980s. Thanks for joining us. We hope you enjoyed this blast from the past and maybe even discovered some surprising connections to your own life.
And until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep those critical thinking skills sharp.
See you on our next deep dive.